So welcome everyone to this event to celebrate the release of Understan, by a new poetry collection by Gavin Barrett. I am Nurjahan Aziz, publisher at Mawenzi House Publishers. I'd like to open with a few acknowledgements first. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Innu, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Our publishing program is supported by Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Government of Canada. We are grateful for their ongoing support. Today, there's going to be a giveaway. The first 5 people who logged in will each receive a free copy of Understan. The winners will be contacted on Friday morning. In today's program, there will be a reading by Gavin of his poetry, followed by a discussion with Meenakshi Alimchandani, after which Gavin will answer questions from the audience. You will be on mute the entire time, so please type your questions in the chat. Gavin's daughters, Faith and April, will join us briefly to sing short pieces. Gavin Barrett was born in Bombay and lived in Hong Kong for several years before immigrating to Canada with his wife and daughters. His poetry has been published in India and Canada. He lives in Toronto, where he runs the Tartan Turban Secret Readings. Toronto-based literary consultant Meenakshi Alimchandani specializes in South Asian literature and authors. Meenakshi consults for Canadian and international publishers and has been a curator and moderator at various literary festivals, including the Toronto International Festival of Authors. We will begin our program with Gavin's daughter, Faith. A psychologist by profession, she is a trained cantor in the Catholic tradition and a writer herself. Faith will sing a cappella invocation, a hymn about the act of creation. Faith, over to you.
Hi, can everyone hear and see me? All right. So the hymn I'm singing is called Praise the Spirit in Creation. Praise the Spirit in Creation is a hymn for the Pentecost season. It speaks of the creative power of God and what it can inspire in us. Praise the Spirit, close companion of our inmost thoughts and ways, who in showing us God's wonders is himself the power to gaze, and God's will to those who listen by a still small voice conveys. Praise the Spirit who enlightened priests and prophets with the word, is the truth behind the wisdoms which as yet not know our Lord, by whose love and power in Jesus God himself was seen and heard. Thank you.
All right, I guess I shall begin. Nurjan, thank you. Thank you, Faith. I'm going to start with a word of thanks. I think is the appropriate place to start, and because you could say I was well raised in doing that, I'm going to start with my mother, and I owe life and literature to my mother, Lorna, without whom I can safely say I might never have written at all. She taught me to read and so to write. She was a professor of literature herself. She was always my promoter and my critic and my friend. And I miss her to this day. I am grateful also for the love of words that I walk within in the family that I went on to make with my wife, Leah, and my daughters, Faith and April. Leah and my daughters all read this manuscript, and I'm quite relieved that they didn't explode in the process, and they're still here with me, loving as always. And if they have any questions about me after all that reading, they're probably the same questions I have about myself. I come in at least broken bits from an Eastern tradition in which your guru grew you. Professor Eunice D'Souza, who taught me at St. Xavier's in Bombay, communicated with tobacco smoke and acerbic comment her love for poets and their brilliant stupidity. And Nissim Ezekiel, who also taught me, praised me and published me and made me fear my own work less and made me love it more. Nissim actually had me gather my entire work, such as it was at the time when I was a young poet, and prepare it for publication. He had planned my book to be part of Rupa and Company's Young Poets series, which was going to publish the first collections of some 14 young poets. And then, boom, the whole venture folded after just 3 collections of 3 poets were published. And that young poet has grown old, as you can see, but he didn't stop writing, and so here we are. Now, I also want to stop here for a moment and remember and thank my good friend Ranjit Hoskote, my fellow poet, my fellow member of the Bombay Poetry Circle from way, way, way back, a critic, editor. He, until now, has published more of my poetry, more of my poetry than anyone else, and he continues to inspire me with his work. I remember with fondness and gratitude the poet, the late Robert Flanagan, and the painter Bob Anderson, both dear friends to each other and to me. Such a gentle joy in my life, and who constantly exhorted me to get this work published. I want to thank my artist friend Bhupesh Luther. I don't know if you can see the book clearly in the camera. It's quite a stunning design. Bhupesh designed it, and I thank him for the gift of his beautiful art for the cover of this book. And I thank my friend and studio manager, Deb Cochran, who helped to ready the cover for production. I didn't see Mayank so far logging in. I know he said he was logging in, and I just want to say thank you to him. He is my too modest partner in promoting diverse literature in Canada through the Tartan Turban Secret Readings. And it was a complaint I made to Mayank, actually, that began this particular journey to this book. I was complaining that I had too many poems and I didn't have the distance to fashion a book from them. And so Mayank said, oh, I can take care of that. And he very pragmatically introduced me to the extraordinary poet and editor Fraser Sutherland, who helped me extract what was necessary from the work that I had collected. So Shukriya Mayank and Doje Fraser for your directness and positivity. Together you were balm and incision, and I won't say which was which. Finally, I want to say that I am deeply grateful for the work done by Nurjahan Aziz and MG Vasanji. I have to tell you that Mr. Vasanji was the person who first published me, for the first time in Canada. He accepted a poem of mine, a longer poem, Apologia, which is in this book, for publication in the Toronto Review of Contemporary Writing Abroad. And after that first time that my work was published in Canada, I have to say that Nurjahan and he are also the reason why my work has been accepted for publication for the second time in Canada, which is this book. The work that Mawenzi House does in terms of bringing writers of various backgrounds from various parts of the world who are now in Canada to publication is incredibly important, and collections like this, I believe, are proof of it. But you get to be the judge tonight. What I'm going to do is I will read a select group of poems from the entire book. Not too many. I'll take a break in between, and April will sing at that time. And I'm going to begin. There's not much. I usually don't have to explain much about my poems. There'll be a couple of exceptions to that rule, and I will just tell you what the title is and read the work, and hopefully you will all be awake at the end of this evening. And when we're done, if any of you want to stay online and engage in additional additional silliness with me, we will have a link posted in the chat to an after party on another Google Meet room. So without further ado, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me clearly? And that's all working fine. Good. Because one of the things I don't do is I don't look at myself, and I don't look at the video screen when I'm reading. I just like to read the words and nothing else, and I don't look at anyone. So forgive me if I seem like I'm not looking into your eyes. We'll do that later, especially you, Leah. So the first poem I'm going to read is called "This Way to the Sangam." This way to the Sangam. By the sea, I met a man out walking a holy elephant, firm of foot and headed south. Walking with him a length, we spoke. Sounds fell from his mouth. Rounds of sand sank into the beach beneath the animal's shuffling feet. He confessed his journey was to the Temple of the North, where even now 1 million men drew near before the crowds arrived. But he was going south, I said. He shrugged his nothing and read my curious face, my foreign speech, considered his slow pace. This white beach, would he not be late? What good was any pilgrimage if it ran straight? So that was This Way to the Sangam. The next poem is called What Does a Desert Breed? What does a desert breed? I have seen stones, but not a reed in the scraping breeze that sounds of sighs and needs. It's not of dryness, this speech, but of distance and reach. A marsh, I know, is a long wick of pitch and slime, soft suck and stick. When I fell from a ship, the seas in which soaked skin bled was the measure of these. Slap, swell, and span, sounds, precious white powder pans. Salt has arms of wet hooped steel. Cold flakes can drown a man in a cargo hold. Flats cut like knives, mirror plate flash, and always it is light that ends lives. That's What Does a Desert Breed? The next poem is a longer poem. It's from a sequence of 9 poems called Novena to Saint X. And this is actually the 9th poem in that cycle of poems. It is called Jalpaiguri, which is a town in the lowlands just below the foothills of the Himalayas in northern West Bengal. Jalpaiguri. It rains. The jute fields fill with frogs as loud and fervent as wealthy Bengalis arguing for some other brand of communism in a Calcutta tea room, cups clattering, glasses misting as they bend to suck from saucer. Other frogs sound their pleasure like guitar strings, plucked with such intensity they break. Inside the cloister, the sisters gather. Outside, the last drunks eat their boiled eggs, and over their last tea glasses of arak. And as the prayed incantations are drawn up by pitch pipe drone, toss insults and garbage over the convent wall. The wall has sickle and hammer graffiti, and the hand of the Congress Party. One holds, the others are held. A metaphor for walls. The nuns sing. Their accents are varied. What is the sound of rape in another language? This is one reason some escape to this place. Some are still mid-flight. Brown birds in brown, rough brown wool they now repair, resting on this branch of labor and the liturgy of the hours. Their ears attend to the silence. Here, sanctuary. The psalm is of sheep. They remember their goats in Kurg and Bastar and understand with complete clarity. The nuns pray for themselves, for the busloads of students who ask their blessings for exams, for the childless man, the sonless wife. They understand husbandry, grow cabbages by a carp pond. The wall encloses pasture for the most valuable thing they own, a stud bull who comes to the prioress like a dog, massive, steaming in the rain. Ashram they call home, work that is prayer, that is work. This is not easy. It is like a bed of stone, like their beds. They pray for the obscene drunks, for the muck-toed farmer turning his bullocks in the slow suck of the flooded paddy field. They pray for rain in the burning south, where their sisters ration water even for tea. A southern leaf from high blue hills with precipice forests wrapped in mist, bound in filaments of stone-edged highway. Their own tea is from well above the rain cloud. Darjeeling sits there, halfway up the Himalayan sky, and clicks her teeth in the fog. Near enough to be heard, over the fish ponds with their milling rohu and climbing perch. Their glass surfaces now rain-hammered into beaten copper at sunrise. Eyes like the eyes of a slave, resting on the breath of her mistress, to you I lift my eyes. This is sung. Then the boys and girls file out in a hush of uncomprehending gratitude to the bus, to all the tests that lie ahead. The sisters' devotion is complete. When the bell rings, they eat breakfast. In the quiet, memory consumes them. The next poem is a poem called Deccan, which is a place on my journey through Understan. It is a place that many of you who come from Bombay will recognize as the plateau not far from the city. You have to climb up into the hills and then cross through them and out into the great central plateau of India. Deccan. Wise man who first said hell was hot. He must have come from this dry, forsaken country, this landscape of black stone and sharp volcanic rubble, this place of the dead. Here, the air is only rarely touched with life. When it stirs, we shiver. Cold sweat collects in a sticky pool at the base of the spine. like some clammy hand lewdly caressing those intimate inner planes of skin where back meets buttock, the cold touch of an old ghost, scared by the heat of the afternoon. And everywhere ash and stone and dead wood and bone. Above, a kite hawk circles, vulgar life blessed by what strange wind on this still afternoon the devil alone knows. But he will not tell. We have not been long enough in hell. And so that's Deccan. I suppose because we are living in COVID-19 times, I should have a poem with the word corona in the title. So this next one is a poem called Flare Corona, but it has nothing to do with the coronavirus. It's a poem about a fight I had with my wife, and it's called Flare Corona. Your voice rises, I notice, not noticing mine. We break like waves or chips of flint. The sun is closest to the earth at the equator. Close out the light in a squint, and shards of color kaleidoscope through eyes. Imprison me. Lash by lash, spectroanalyze my what and who. Each blinding flash of you may imprison me. I realize in the lid shut dark, my tide is in. This size I have become may drown you. This whip of light you are may cut, burn me. Flare, Corona, be my crown. And now I'm going to pause. I'm going to introduce, you heard my firstborn earlier, Faith, with the invocation, and I'd like to introduce my second child, my younger daughter, April. April is also a writer like Faith. April is a singer-songwriter, and she lives and performs in Montreal, and she's going to give you a break from my voice and sing one of her newer songs.
Can you hear me okay?
No, I think we need to make you louder in some way. I don't know. We're going to do some technical adjustments.
Yeah.
I can't really hear you, April, at the moment.
Oh, okay. Well, how about now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm April. I'm a singer-songwriter, as my dad said. This song I wrote is the most recent one that I've written. Re-examining an old relationship, and it's from the perspective of two different people talking to each other. So leave me alone. I am trying to respect you. You tell everyone you don't need me to protect you. You falter and fly, then you say you're coming home, but then you are never happy and you're never alone. Give me a break. I saw the writing on the wall, and I went to the river, and there I saw it all. The dog breathed heavy, the sheets became soil. We all touched each other, and no one recoiled. Oh, I said I'd be happy when I made it on my own, but then I am never happy and I'm never alone. Can't you see that I've always been here? You were the one who disappeared for 2 years. When you were out there, I stayed unseen.
Thank you, April. Yay. I'm clearly a very proud father. I think you can tell. Thank you, girls. Love you both. All right, it's back. It's back to the next set of readings. I am going to start with a poem called "The Kiss." This is one of the poems that I will explain a little bit more about. It's about a poem about my mother, about my mother's death, actually, her funeral. She died very young and very suddenly. She was just 61, and it completely shook up my brothers and me and my dad, leaving us four men behind. She was very much the center of our lives in that family. My mother was besides being a professor of literature, was a social justice activist, a feminist. I have a feeling that something rubbed off on all of us in the process. When she died, as is classic in a patriarchal institution like the Catholic Church, to which I belong, and to which she did too. There was my mother was a leader of Catholic women in the Catholic Church, and constantly advocating for the voice of women in the church to be heard and to be made stronger and equal to the voice of men. And her sisters in that movement wanted to speak in her memory, to speak their eulogies in her memory. And of course, being the patriarchal institution it was, there was no room for that made for them. So my brothers and I conspired to make room in our eulogies for her friends and fellow warriors. And when our turn was done, we invited, unbeknownst to those who were trying to prevent it, invited them up, and they basically, what they did was they transformed that moment of grief. And that's what this poem is about. The Kiss. My father kissed my mother's face where we stood inside her tomb. A barrel-vaulted cradle space. Her name echoed in that room, and nothing was the same. I spoke, said her name, read my piece, and my father's mind. My brothers sang love and peace. It was hard to find, and nothing was the same. The walls of the grave were thick stone 6 feet deep. We four were sick. The stone rang with grief. Nothing was the same. We hear of men. Have you heard a woman rise? From deep inside a grave, women raise her high, thousands, from aisle into the nave. The pews are flames, and now nothing is the same. And that's a poem about my mum's funeral and her feminist social justice friends, and the moment of joy and strength they gave us in that moment of loss. The next poem is actually, I'm going to read excerpts from the longest single poem in the book. In the book, it's 10 pages long, so I will not be reading 10 pages of poetry to you. I have chosen a very small selection of lines. The lines are all written as pairs, as couplets, then the conceit in that is because the poem's title is 10,000 Thoughts on Love. Now, this is a poem non finito. It is a poem never to be finished. It is a poem that will always be in the process of being written, and I hope to continue adding to it, and I hope that it will continue to appear in its longer and longer forms, possibly until I am no longer here. 10,000 Thoughts on Love. When we lie in bed, the flowers on the windowsill hold their breath and shake with desire. When you take the ring off, the skin is naked, but still dressed in promises. Did you hear the neighbors last night? They were fighting. I thought they were making love, he said. Families are the burdens we carry into a marriage, like corpses carry clothes into the dirt. They sat at the table to eat with their children, but became bitter as they drank with their parents. He lay in the sand with her, passionate and then indolent. Years later, they still found grit in their salad. At the altar, 3 couples made the sign of the cross, a mystery to themselves. Ever travelers, they ran out light and returned heavy as camels of old, with gold, spiced goods, and stories for the cold. Ever travelers, they ran out of light and returned heavy-hearted as camels, dry and old and cold, even in the desert. Jute is both cane and cloth. He watched his daughters sway up the avenue of Ashokas in the dusk between the harvest and the hay. I fought for you, he said. Fight for me. I will fight you, she said, because I know you appreciate a fight. My wife, I do not understand, said the astrophysicist drunkenly. She looked to the skies for help. Oh, alien love. Acrobats in acrobat love, they threw themselves at each other and fell and flew. In sight of each other, names were called and words were said. That night they found themselves the same. One clothed, one naked, one bed. And those are a few of the, the couplets from 10,000 Thoughts on Love. This next poem comes with a trigger warning. It is a poem, if you've lived in India, you've probably seen a few things that nobody should ever see. And this is a poem about one of those things. It is a poem in which great injustice and great violence is done to a woman, somebody we knew in our family, and whom my mother was helping in vain, unfortunately. It is a poem in which this woman is done violence to and dies. And so if you want to mute me, or you mute your computer or take off your headphones if you're listening on headphones, I will not fault you at all. But it's a deeply saddening episode that I was witness to myself. It's called, the woman's name was Mary, and the poem is called Seeing Mary. Mary burned, Mary turned and ran, tongues of flame springing from her forehead. Mary burned in May when the earth is dry and dead. He set a match to her, licks of fire in the thatch of her hair. The cold and furious flame of the things he said caught her nylon sari, and it flared where the cheap gold border met the red. Mary ran across the field. Mary screamed and fell. A boy with a blanket smothered Mary's smoking head. Burning hair has the whiff of hell for those who live. But Mary is dead. One brief night, Mary burned, a torch of kerosene and bone and flesh, casting shadows off with violent light. Cinders fell and died, and then Mary too. And lean, hungry, barking dogs barked back the dark, usual night. And this is my final poem. It is the title poem, the poem in a way for which the book is named, Understan. Camels thread through the thorn trees. They are insouciant grazers. The wind stirs like memory. Now I know I was remembering the future. Stone shards bloom everywhere in this arid pasture, flowers of hurt. Bare feet fly, flail, blur, bleed. Do you know what it is to die an honorable death? Asked guides and priests. Monumental the question, the place. I confess I am my collected works, books on shelves, names like arrogance and tobacco, page upon unprinted page, blank and full, black and white. And life, I ask, as the women return with their brass pots, do I know? We all fall silent. A fresco mocks us. It shows a couple cavorting in the first-class compartment of a train. We bare our teeth, voyeurs of the past, always looking over our shoulders, wondering if we will be caught in flagrante delicto ourselves. Long knives, short lives, songs that bubble to their ends in pools of blood, stories that started yesterday and end 4,000 years ago, once upon, ever after. My children laugh, their pleasure plain like prose, like poetry, their pain. Thank you, everyone. And that's the final poem. And now I'm going to invite Meenakshi to interview me. And after Meenakshi and I have had our chat, I will read any questions that you have posted in the chat. I will do my best to go back and find the questions that you've asked that haven't been covered in the chat with Meenakshi, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if I don't get a chance to answer them, we will be posting, of course, a link to the after party where you can drink with me and interrogate me at your leisure. Meenakshi, good to have you here, my friend.
Good to be here. Good to be here. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Noorjahan, and thank you, Mawenzi, for giving me this opportunity. So should we plunge into it?
Absolutely.
Okay, how do you get your inspiration and what is your writing process? I know poetry is a very, very difficult genre to work with. So what do you think about that? Would you,
So let me start with the inspiration. It could be anything. Neighbors talking quietly on a moonless night, 3 backyards over, the smell of smoke in the air, or just the beauty of your children's voices singing, or the angry fight you had with your wife. It could be that, and this is a recent poem I wrote, the choking airless humidity inside the Great Pyramid, or bees visiting the sunflowers that grew by fluke from fallen birdseed. It all shows up in some way. But you asked me about process, so that's inspiration. What about process? I think when I write, I try to set myself in a state of grace, and that might seem profane to say when you think that so many of my poems are filled in different places with despair and rage, or even eroticism. But I don't mean a state of grace in a religious way. I mean it in a somewhat spiritual way, which is not as banal as it sounds. Writing poetry, in a sense, is a compact with the mystical. You have to be ready to receive. You have to be empty to be filled with the spirit, in a way, and sometimes that spirit is Scotch. And yes, poetry is difficult. That's part of the process. It's certainly difficult for poets. I don't know many poets who are actually making a living from poetry, but there's incredible joy in the making of something that surprises even you, the poet, and that's incredibly rewarding. But it is very hard work. I will say to you that there are poems in this book, in Understan, that I wrote 35 years ago that I was still editing right up until March this year. So I think you have to be a little mad to be a poet. And that's why Plato banished the poets from his ideal republic. They were scary to him, and his tidy mind. He would complain that they were fed by divine madness. I think Leah will question the divine, but she'll agree with the madness part.
Tell me about the title, Understan. How did you think about it? Where did you get that inspiration to call it Understan?
Yeah, well, I guess the title poem, first of all, in the book is Understan, but beyond the one poem, the book is a reflective journey through what lies below the surface. So under, an interior landscape or mindscape, but it also traverses time, decades in this case, and external geographies, the real places or the real things that I've seen. And I'd like to think that on the journey that I've questioned belief and superstition in a democratic way, but I suspect it's more that I've questioned them like an unhinged man might yell at every car that passes on a street, or a dog barks at every bicycle. I will confess that I am not a person with answers. I think I can with certainty say that I am a lost person on the wandering journey that I've taken. But somehow the book contains, or poetry contains, a map to everywhere and everyone. And I suppose, like so many other men, I refuse to use it.
Okay. Tell me, living on 3 continents and 3 cultures, Hong Kong, India, and Canada, how's that affected your journey as a writer and as a poet?
I have this quote I'm very fond of that Brian Eno has about computers, oddly enough, which is a weird place to start this answer to your question. Brian Eno said about computers that the trouble with computers is they don't have enough Africa in them. And I actually think that perhaps, and maybe I'm saying this because I'm me and I've come from the place I've come from, but I think problem with a lot of North American poetry is that there's not enough India in it, maybe, and my poetry is certainly full of India. It's got a lot of Canada too, but India has an effect on you. And as an example, in India, as a young poet, I wrote 3 to 4 poems a day. Thankfully, not all of them are publishable. So I can't embarrass myself. But how could you not? This is the country where a holy man and an elephant, as in the first poem I read today, can set off on a pilgrimage by heading in the opposite direction. It's also a place where murder can be claimed as prayer. It's a weird place. There aren't any poems, Meenakshi, about Hong Kong in this book, but that's not because I don't want to write about Hong Kong or Hong Kong.
But there is a subtle influence there.
Yes.
You don't have to write about something to get that influence into your work.
Yes. I meant, I have strong feelings for Hong Kong. My daughters are made in Hong Kong, as the old phrase goes. But after all that mad in India, made in Hong Kong stuff, I was domesticated in India. I mean, in Canada, I was domesticated in the sense, I think Canada domesticated me in the sense that I learned to enjoy the domestic, and it, at the same time, and here's the odd contradiction, perhaps it introduced me to the wilderness. Canada is where, Canada introduced me to the Yukon, to the Aurora, to glaciers, Lake Louise, Cape Breton, Wales. This is interestingly not such an experience, this constant ability to interact with the wild, not so much available to an urban Indian city boy, so at the end, I guess I can say I might be domesticated, but not tamed quite yet.
I've been reading the poems in depth, and there is this common theme: your devotion, your love to your wife, your family, to your parents. Family is everything to you, and it comes through so strongly in those poems. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, certainly. Family and friends, I guess, both, because in a sense, what's life without love? What's poetry without those you love? And the interesting thing about love is that it infuriates and inspires at the same time. And the longest poem, as I was mentioning, is this unfinished poem called 10,000 Thoughts on Love. And the book contains, several poems about my mother, who was a professor of literature and a force of nature, a one-woman warrior for justice. My grandmother appears in her last days. My girls, Faith and April, both appear. My wife. The whole book is dedicated to Leah. And my brothers are in there. And many friends float in and out of many poems. But I'll tell you one secret about this. The manuscript was complete, and I had read through it, and I realized I didn't have a poem in the book about my father. So I went away and I wrote one, and that's actually the very last poem in the book. It's called My Father the Sailor in his 80s. So he's in there too.
I have a kind of it's a little bit of an iffy question, about why are immigrant poets of color so very poorly represented in Canada, especially anthologies or by publishers? And do you think this applies all across the board to CanLit?
It's a question that is loaded with truth, Meenakshi. So I think I'm glad you're asking it. I'm actually doing some work with the Canadian Authors Association, the Toronto branch, about how to improve diversity in the Canadian Authors Association.
Very important.
And we've been having conversations. They're an incredible organization that's actually genuine about their intent to change this. So there are things happening, and I think things are changing. And since the time I arrived in Canada, I've been noticing things change. But it is true for CanLit in general. Toronto is 57% visible minority now, and I doubt that what is published reflects anything near that in terms of immigrant voices of color, voices of color, in fact, in Toronto. And that's not that there's no poetry. There's plenty of poetry by immigrants of color. But we just need to get more of it published. Yeah,
they don't get published.
And then you have to ask, who's making the decisions? How much power do poets of color have in that differential? How many publishers are run by immigrants of color? How many agents are immigrants of color? How many editors? Exactly. How many on prize juries? How many reviewers? There is conscious and unconscious bias embedded in CanLit, like in everything in Canada, not just in CanLit. But I believe it's getting better. And yes, there is bias against immigrants of color because we've got, we've got these foreign accents and we've got these un-Canadian stories, and yet when you think about it, what could be more Canadian than an immigrant story? In a way, I'm not talking about, pre-Canadian stories, which are indigenous stories, which are definitely more. But anyway, to fix that, I think we need more Nurjahan Azizas and more M.G. Vasanjis and more Mawenzis, and we need more Meenakshi Alamchandanis.
Thank you. I'm honored. Okay. My next one is, I really can see, how the sacred and the religious symbolism is such a strong theme in your poetry. Especially in the one that I read, Novena to Saint X. What do you say about that?
Guilty. I am a Catholic, so I'll say guilty as charged. I was born into the faith. I was raised in the faith. But that faith even is still something I'm coming to terms with, because terrible things have been done in the name of God. Have been done in the name of God here in Canada, for that matter, and not just here, everywhere.
Everywhere.
And it can be safely said that God wants nothing to do with any of those things that have been done in his or her name. To be honest, it is impossible not to be influenced by the idea of the sacred and its intersection with the profane. If you come from India, you trip on religion wherever you turn. This shrine is sainted and that dirt is holy and that man is Bhagwan, God. Truthfully though, it is the mystic that attracts me, the mystical, the monastic even. Odd to say for somebody who likes his creature comforts, but it is attractive to me because of the interiority that poetry requires, and that's for me, that's holy space. I think truthfully, in terms of faith, spirituality, religion, and the themes that float through all my writing, I think I'm in the role of seeker, hardly ever finder. And in this, I'm reminded of a favorite poet of mine, Anne Sexton, one of the great confessional poets. Anne Sexton has this book titled "The Awful Rowing Towards God," which I think really captures that sense of travel and journey, and searching and discovery and effort and struggle. So
So, the other thing that I noticed, the sea and water is kind of a very strong thread running through your poems, almost like a narrator or binding your whole collection together. Is that true?
I
Water.
think, yes, I think water, that's very, very observant of you. I mean, actually, I think water does appear repeatedly. That's a gift from my father. He was a merchant marine sailor, and we traveled with him a great deal as young boys. And I fell in love with the sea. I even thought I would be a merchant marine sailor myself, but I discovered that bad eyes were going to be an impediment to getting a master's ticket. Water was a part of my life even before I was born. It's how my father and mother met and fell in love. She was on her way from Dar es Salaam to Bombay to begin university, and he was this debonair ship's purser with an eye for beauty. And then, of course, there's Bombay and Hong Kong, where I've lived before, Toronto, and they're both islands surrounded by water. And so for me, I've always had to live within walking distance of water. I'm not surprised that it should appear, in the work. It naturally appears in the work. But even here in Toronto, I have to live within walking distance of water, even where it turns to ice.
I wish I could live that close to water. Thank you, Gavin. You've been very candid with your answers. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And if for the audience, if you have a question for Gavin, please do so on the chat. Also, I would appreciate it if you guys are a little generous and give others a chance. So question is very welcome, and opinion can be discussed later on. And please, please, please go and buy this book. It's available wherever books are sold. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Meenakshi. That's you're amazing. It's always good to, Meenakshi and I chat all the time in any case.
We do.
We show up at I show up at the festivals that Meenakshi has had a hand in curating, and she just does an amazing job. Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to try very hard to answer whatever questions I can and leave some time for Nurjahan to have a few last remarks. And then I think Faith will paste into the chat the link to the Zoom, well, it's actually a Google Meet after party, where if you feel I've missed your question, you can grill me there. Okay, so let's go back in the chat. Let's see. Question. All right. Oh. Anyone wants to? Oh, let's see. Have you ever written a poem out of pure malice? That's an awesome question, Ben. Yes, I have. It's not in this book. Not that I can think of. I've written poems because I was deeply disturbed by experiences I had, but they helped me heal. In the writing helped me heal. But this book doesn't contain poems I wrote in malice. But I did write a poem that hasn't been published, which is called My Enemy's Enemy, and it's it's quite entertaining. Okay, what else? Let's see. Is there a specific order to the poems, chronological or thematic? No, they are not in any particular order. I think I tried to separate the long poems, and and Fraser, who worked with me, tried. This was, the thing that I struggled with most because I had no distance from them. So it was a great help to me to work with him. Mr. Vasanji made some very appropriate comments on the poems and edits, and that was a great help. But I did not. They sort of fell into place. Would that be fair to say, Nurjahan? There has not been much shuffling around of the poems. They sort of, they're sort of in the order they sort of felt right. I don't know how that happened. God knows that I have very little to do with that sort of thing. Do I write as I see, or do I add my own emotion to the poem? Asks Khalid. It's a combination. A lot of the receiving part of the poem has to do with being in that interior state where you are open to wherever things might come at you. But the craft part of the poem is where things get added, and you say, and very often you can go back on the craft part and say, this is getting in the way of itself. This is not true to what I was trying to do in the first place. And sometimes the craft actually makes the poem so much better that it changes everything for the better. Okay, next question. I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then you're all welcome to join me in the next room. So we can let the kind folks at Mawenzi have a life. Let's see. What is your relationship? There we go. What is your relationship to a poem once you've finished writing it? Arif, thank you. Good question.
Good one.
I stay the hell away from it for a while. It terrifies me. I usually am very pleased with myself, which is even more terrifying. When I've written a poem, I think, oh, look at this wonder that I have wrought, which is precisely the wrong instinct. And I think I let it. So I realize consciously what I've done, and I move off it. And sometimes I come back to poems after a year, and I'm compelled to rewrite it, and I realize how much less brilliant I was at the time than I thought. Okay, Lee, how has it been juggling? That's because this is going to be the last answer I'll give. So everyone else in the chat, gather your questions and come on over to the next chat. I'll answer Lee's question, and then it'll be back to Nurjahan. Lee asks, Lee, by the way, is the co-president of the Canadian Authors Association. Hey, Lee. How has it been juggling poetry and advertising? Do they reinforce each other? And if so, in what ways? Wow, that's in other people see connections. I think they say I've heard other poets tell me that there's a boldness in advertising that they see that poets very often are too restrained or hold themselves back, and there's a boldness from advertising that I bring to poetry because I take chances and risks that perhaps other people wouldn't. I did not see that. I did not know that until I was told that. But advertising is very hard on a creative person. It leaves very little room for any creative energy to be left for any other kind of creative work. So if you're a creative person in advertising, which is what I have been, it has a negative effect on your poetry, on your other writing. And it is a struggle to carve time and to set aside creative energy and guard it for the act of poetry. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Nurjahan. Faith, if you could paste into the chat the link to the other group. Everyone, it is a Google, there we go. You can just copy and paste it and open it up in another tab. And Nurjahan, we are in your hands for the final words. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm very, very grateful to you.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you for such a thoughtful reading. We are so pleased to have published you. Thank you to Meenakshi, for your moderating capabilities were on full display, and interviewer. And we at Mawenzi are very appreciative of your ongoing support to our press. Just to let you know that we do appreciate it. And I would also like to say, that we thank you to the very talented Faith and April for their beautiful singing.
Big thank you.
Yes. So this wraps up our evening with Gavin and Meenakshi. But finally, I would also like to thank the Mawenzi staff who have put in so much effort into this event, and who are generally very good workers at Mawenzi, and that's Maria and Sabrina.
Thank you, Maria and Sabrina. Yes,
Thank you,
so
Maria. Thank you,
Know that
Sabrina.
we really appreciate their work. And just as a final reminder that books can be purchased from bookstores, but the easiest way also would be to purchase from our website, www.mawenzihouse.com. And I believe Maria has posted that website somewhere.
And there will be a recording of this made available later.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and I will keep posting about the links to Mawenzi House, so you'll be able to find your way to the site.
Thank you, Gavin, for your promotion work as well. And
Thank you.
Thank you to all the audience for participating tonight.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you
so
all.
much.
It's a delight to see you all. I can't believe I'm seeing you, seeing so many faces. I hope I'll see you in the next room. You don't have to be there, no pressure at all. But if you want to just swear at me, that's the place to do it. All right.
All right.
Well, I will paste it in one more time. Into the main chat. Oh, everyone. Okay, everyone's got it. They're saying very good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night to those in Canada, and have a lovely day to those in other parts of the world far away. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nurjan.
You're welcome. Thank you, and bye,
Very
everyone.
grateful.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.